It is Tuesday, October 18th, and this is your 28storms.com and Hurricane Tracker app tropical weather update. Much of the tropical Atlantic basin is quiet with the exception of the surface low over the southeast Gulf of Mexico, which will continue to bring some heavy rainfall and some treacherous conditions across the state of Florida over the next 24 to 48 hours. The latest floater visible imagery shows that we still have a very elongated surface trough from southwest to northeast. We can make out some small low-level vortices, but nothing is overly well defined, and it's still just very elongated more than anything. If you look at the enhanced infrared, it's beginning to take on an increasingly apparent linear appearance, and is providing much in the way of some heavy shower and thunderstorm activity for much of southern Florida. Any potential for subtropical or purely tropical development has come to an end. We see that much of the upper level conditions over the Gulf of Mexico are now supportive only for some baroclinic development or non-tropical formation of a low pressure center that will eventually form and strengthen over southern Florida and then extend more into the east coast of the United States. We see that the winds are becoming a little stronger here across much of the Gulf. We have some southwest wind shear out in advance of those two mid to upper level short waves advancing over the central portion of the United States. Also, as mentioned in prior videos, we have a fairly strong cold front beginning to dip into the lower Mississippi Valley. Based on the latest surface analysis, you can tell that a surface low is developing over central Kentucky, and along with it we have an associated cold front that is draped all the way into northwest Louisiana, where currently the temperatures are in the mid-50s despite it being 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Over the next day or so, the mid to upper level trough over the central United States will become more negatively tilted, and that will result in the surface low over Florida becoming the more dominant feature at the surface. Therefore, this is going to be the biggest rainmaker over central Florida. We're expecting 2 to 4 inches, and as this begins to curve northward up the east coast, we're going to see rainfall totals of 1 to 3 inches all the way into New England. The latest regional radar shows much of Florida already getting swamped by some heavy rainfall, but not only will we have the threat for some really significant precip totals, but also the threat of isolated tornadoes will exist, especially over central and southeast Florida, in advance of some of these stronger storms beginning to push on into the lower half of the state. As noted by the Storm Prediction Center, they have been looking at the radar quite frequently, and if you switch over to the velocity, we are noticing some supercellular activity, meaning that some of these storms are beginning to rotate, and so once these storms begin to make it into southern Florida, that is when the tornado threat will really begin. This is the latest NAM forecast model output for 7 p.m. this evening. We see that there is a surface low just to the west of Tampa, Florida. Out ahead of that surface low, we have south-southeast winds near the surface, but if we go ahead and look at the 500 millibar layer or the mid-levels, notice that the winds are out of the southwest, so this is a fairly good recipe for pretty strong wind shear, and as a result of that, we see 0 to 1 kilometer energy helicity index values greater than 1, and this typically just tells us that there is a chance for at least some weak, brief tornadoes over central and southern Florida. And not only do we have wind shear, but we also have pretty good instability over much of the state, so that tornado threat definitely does exist, and the tornado probabilities will expand northward into the extreme coastal portions of Georgia and the Carolinas over the next 24 to 36 hours. If we look very quickly into the eastern Pacific, much of the tropics to the south of Mexico are quiet this afternoon, although we will be monitoring the tail end of the monsoon trough that is located currently over the Gulf of Tehuantepec. The models are showing a relatively quiet eastern Pacific throughout the next 3 to 5 days, but thereafter the monsoon trough could become active once again, so this will be the next feature to watch. This is the latest 12Z CMC forecast for the next 6 days. Starting off in the southeast Gulf of Mexico, you will notice that our system will move up into the mid-Atlantic states, as you can see there. In the meantime, the rest of the Atlantic basin is generally quiet. However, as we go into days 5 and day 6, the model is showing the lower half of the cold front stalling out over the western Caribbean, and with time another area of low pressure develops over the western Caribbean to the southwest of Jamaica. However, this is the only model showing any development down there, so we're not too concerned about that probability of this occurring just yet. And over there into the eastern Pacific, we started off with a broad area of low pressure near the Gulf of Tehuantepec, and the model is showing some development as it moves off toward the west-northwest. But as you can see, even if this were to develop, the model continues to take it generally out to sea and well away from the coastline. Switching over to the 12Z GFS model, once again our broad low in the southeast Gulf of Mexico intensifies as it begins to move up the east coast. The rest of the Atlantic Basin is quiet, but much like the CMC model, as we go into day 6 and day 7, we have another eastern Pacific storm. Luckily, so far, the models are taking this in a west-northwest direction to the southwest of Manzanillo, but we will still keep an eye on this. And finally, this is the overnight run of the ECMWF model. In 24 hours, notice that the low pressure over the southeast Gulf is beginning to move into the Big Bend area of Florida. And then as we work our way into Thursday and Friday, it's already well into the New England states, while much of the deep tropical Atlantic remains quiet all the way through the forecast period, including day 10. So the tropics are generally quiet this afternoon, but interests in Florida are still advised to pay close attention to the weather over the next day or so. The Storm Prediction Center will more than likely issue a tornado watch for portions of the state later this afternoon, so just be alert, but otherwise you should be fine. So thanks again for visiting 28storms.com. We will have another video by tomorrow afternoon.